upstate New York, the gravestone of suffragist Matilda Joslyn Gage proudly proclaims, "There is a word sweeter than mother, home, or heaven. That word is liberty." This assertion is a response to the motto of Women's Christian Temperance Union President Frances Willard, which stated that there is no word sweeter than mother, home, or heaven. At the crux of this rhetorical skirmish lies differing beliefs regarding the proper sphere of women and women's relation to the home. While many women and men, reformers and non-reformers alike, believed that women's proper place was within the home during the 19th and early 20th centuries, there were also powerful voices of dissent, such as that of Gage. Her apparent dismissal of the importance of home, however, belies how significant home and family actually were in her individual case, as evidenced by family letters as well as the material culture associated with her home. In this paper, I discuss the varied and complex relationships between women, reform, and the home through examining the material and historical records affiliated with two prominent reform women, the aforementioned Matilda Joslyn Gage of upstate New York and May Cheney of Berkeley, California. As they both lived in periods during which time the material surroundings of the home were seen as crucial to maintaining a proper image of femininity and for raising the next generation of American citizens, their houses and their houses' contents are significant resources for untangling the relationship between consumer goods, gender ideology, and considerations of practice. To this end, I focus on a single category of material goods recovered from archaeological excavations at each household for this short paper: white ironstone ceramics from the Gage home and canning jars of the Cheney home. My work is informed by theorists who have focused on aspects of agency and practice. In particular, the work of Michel Desserteaux is particularly apt for such considerations in contexts where mass-produced material goods are being studied. Central to Desserteaux's work is the concept of poaching, which calls attention to the uses to which resources are put by consumers who are not their creators. In this formulation, consumption itself is a different kind of production. This dovetails well with archaeological theorizing, which sees artifacts not as simply reflective of cultural indicators such as economic status or gender, but as active components in the process of creating social discourses. This active view of the use of material goods is critical for viewing households such as those of the Gages and the Cheneys as a dynamic and socially significant arenas of culture contestation and change that they were. Matilda Joslyn Gage presided over a household consisting of her husband, 4 children, occasional servants, and boarders in this house shown here between 1854 and 1898, what we know as the Victorian period. During this time, home was ideally seen as a feminine haven from the dangers of commerce and politics, which were the province of men outside the home. Middle and upper class women were charged with furnishing and maintaining a domestic sphere that would provide the proper moral environment for raising children and for re-civilizing their husbands upon their return from the outside world. This vision of the ideal home included quite particular furnishings and consumables, from formal dining room and parlor furniture sets to the use of live plants and natural motifs in decorating, and to expansive sets of table ceramics including individualized place settings with specific vessels for different foods. Women were tasked with buying and using the correct material objects in order to craft appropriate surroundings for their family, which emphasized Christian morality, order, hierarchy, control, and discipline. Given that Gage was an iconoclastic reformer who sought to do no less than change the gendered, racialized, and political landscape of her time through her suffrage, abolition, and women's rights work, it is tempting to believe that she would have wholly rejected the view of the home as woman's sacred sphere and its attendant ideological baggage. However, documentary and archaeological evidence indicates that she in fact had nearly all of the trappings of the ideal Victorian home, from this abundantly furnished and decorated formal parlor to plain white ironstone table settings with all of the kinds of specialized vessels that one would expect. So to probe this seeming contradiction more deeply, I'll now turn to these tablewares. A significant proportion of the ceramics recovered from the site are what we call white ironstone, which was a sturdy, relatively plain, and moderately expensive type of ceramic that was immensely popular during the second half of the 19th century. The Gages owned tea and dining ware pieces in a variety of common patterns. Of greatest interest for the purpose of this discussion is their ownership of both a tea and dining set of ironstone in the Gothic pattern, and that is depicted in the upper right and bottom left. Photos there. Fragments were found that represented dinner plates, soup plates, muffins, which would be small plates, teacups, and saucers. Their use of ceramics in this particular pattern is interesting, given that at the time, the use of the Gothic style, particularly in architecture, furnishings, and household goods, was explicitly linked ideologically to the moral sanctity of women and the home and the enacting of the cult of domesticity. This seems to fly in the face of what we know of Gage and her reform efforts, which sought to place women on equal legal and social footing with men, and, importantly, maintain a separation between church and state. This got her into quite a lot of trouble during her lifetime. The dinnerwares in this pattern, then, may actually have been used for family dinners, and perhaps Gage did embrace the dominant belief that such items symbolize the sanctity of home and family, as she was a mother and wife, and family letters indicate, that she had normal human relationships with her family members. The teawares, on the other hand, likely had different meanings depending on the context in which they were used within the home. From historical records, we know that Gage regularly entertained other reformers in her home, which at the time would most likely have included serving tea. I see these meetings as arenas in which Gage and her reformer compatriots actively imbued these objects with quite different non-hegemonic meanings. Gage and fellow suffrage reformers Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, who both spent time at the House, did no less than plot revolution while sipping their Earl Grey in the parlor. Gage also periodically held meetings in the home to draw in potential new supporters to various reform efforts. This happened during the Civil War, as part of her Women's National Liberal Union, and also for abolition and suffrage efforts. So these events would also have included tea. And I argue that her use of normative material culture would have been an important statement to potential new allies who might otherwise have been scared off by a home that appeared too radical and out of the norm. Thus, we can see ownership and use of these Gothic-styled ceramics by Gage not simply as reflecting her support for a gendered ideology that idealized women in the home, but rather as a resource to be utilized for different purposes in different contexts. Now, May Shepard, here in her fabulous hat, was an early graduate of the University of California, Berkeley in 1883, and she married fellow university alum Warren Chaney in the same year. In 1885, they had this home built just beyond the edge of the university's grounds, and here they raised 4 sons and accepted various student boarders over the years. Beginning in 1899, May worked for the university, ultimately for 40 years, after arguing for the creation of her position, which was that of appointments secretary, and established what we would now know as the Career Center. As a member of the university administration, she used her influence to advocate for female students' needs, access to housing, as well as social and intellectual spaces on campus. She was involved in a variety of progressive era reform efforts, actually a bewildering array of them, which included women's suffrage, promoting physical education for children, eliminating graft from government, and ensuring consumer and worker safety. She bridged her university and reform work most clearly in her dogged advocacy for establishing a domestic science curriculum at the university in order to provide intellectual space, especially for female students. And despite what we think of things like home economics in our current cultural milieu, back at the time it was actually quite radical to believe that women needed to be scientifically trained as a means of elevating their position. In her view, bringing domestic science into the university would allow women to gain employment as teachers of domestic science in primary and secondary schools and universities, in addition to preparing them for, quote, the oldest profession of all, the profession of housewife. We've heard that quote with a different, but that was her take on it in 1909. So given that the goals of these progressive era reforms was, as she put it, to, quote, teach people to control their environment, end quote, it would make sense that she applied these same ideals in the family home. In this, the choice and use of material culture affiliated with the home assumes significant importance once again. Instead of the Victorian focus on collecting objects and exhibiting lavish decorations, progressive era reformers advocated streamlined, functional decor that was much more easily and efficiently cleaned. The focus on cleanliness, efficiency, and sanitary safety by domestic science advocates was nowhere more apparent than in the kitchen. These fragments of glass canning jars and lid liners found archaeologically, as well as an intact mason jar found in the house of the Cheneys before it was demolished by the university in 2010, suggests a linkage between Cheney's advocacy for domestic science and the implementation of its principles within her own home. Contextual sources suggest that the quality and specific design of kitchen items was a prime concern for women involved in the domestic science movement. Here's an example of a cookery class. And then this is a list of equipment purchased for a cookery class in 1905 at the University of California, Berkeley. Correspondence between the teacher of a university's summer course on cookery in 1905 and the university's secretary in charge of purchasing equipment for the classroom highlights the domestic science emphasis on buying high-quality equipment and specialized tools fitted to their particular use. And you can see this is only the equipment that was bought from one particular store, so this wasn't even everything for the course. But there are several very specifically tailored items. And the correspondence as a whole shows this kind of ongoing tussle over how much money the university was even willing to put out to equip the classroom, where the instructor, Bartlett, was really advocating for higher quality items to be bought from specific stores that were known for their quality, and the university didn't want to spend that much money. She lost, but the course was still taught. Moreover, such mundane kitchen goods became powerfully symbolic in their daily use as efforts to improve the kitchen and thereby family life and correspondingly society as a whole, as was really the ultimate goal. A 1909 newspaper article details a day of pageantry held at collegiate alumni, which we now know as the American Association of University Women, of which May was a prominent member throughout her life. It notes that the procession included members dressed to represent the various interests of the organization, including suffragists, college graduates, and faculty in their caps and gowns, and certified milk enthusiasts dressed as milkmaids, which you can see on the bottom there, followed by, quote, the members whose tastes run to home economics, led by Mrs. May L. Cheney, wearing white gowns and caps, and carrying each some household emblem, one a preserving kettle, another a duster, yet another a broom or a sewing bag. Now, the presence of a preserving kettle in this suite of emblems highlights the significance that household canning of foodstuffs had in the domestic science movement, with its ties to proper nutrition and the need for a scientific understanding of food decay, contamination, and sterilization. Much attention was given to the proper techniques for canning in domestic science education and widely circulated educational materials, such as the circular produced by the university's Agricultural Experiment Station in 1924. Thus, while the fragments of canning jars and lid liners found in our excavations would have been a part of food preparation and consumption activities in the home, they were also a part of larger discourses on applying scientific procedures in the home, women's work, and efforts to reshape society at large. To sum up, ceramics at the Gage House and canning jars at the Cheney House illustrate the tension between dominant ideological beliefs regarding the meaning of material goods and the meanings imbued in those material goods by their actual use by past actors. The home has long been an ideologically charged arena, and the examples of Matilda Joslyn Gage and May Cheney show how actual women who sought to expand their sphere dealt with the hegemonic ideals relating women to the home during their lifetimes. For us as researchers, attention must be paid to how people actually used material objects within their particular historical contexts in order to give credit to the creativity with which people, especially women, sought to make changes to their world.